Hi, I'm Trevor Stevenson, and welcome to Your Story Will Be Different. This is a narrative play podcast where I tell you the stories that come to be from playing a solo tabletop role-playing game. For this session, we're going to continue and conclude our playthrough of Ironsworn by Sean Tompkin. When last we left our hero, Thora Kolddotir, she had just reached the edge of the Hinterlands and was about to dive into the deep, dark forest therein. A day later, the dense forest was swallowing the site of Timberwall and the ridge it sat on, leaving Thora alone in the vast expanse of the Hinterlands. The towering trees closed in around her, their twisted branches and thick canopy casting long shadows that made it difficult to tell time. The air was heavy with the scent of damp earth and moss, the only sounds the occasional rustle of leaves and the soft, steady crunch of her boots on the forest floor. After an indefinable amount of time, Thora noticed a disturbance in the undergrowth, tracks that did not belong to the local wildlife. She knelt down, examining the impression in the soft earth. The tracks were fresh, too recent to be more than a few hours old. Her pulse quickened as she followed the trail, bringing her close to a small, abandoned campsite. The remnants of the fire still smoldered, its ashes faintly glowing in the dim light. Scattered around the site were signs of a struggle. Broken branches, upturned earth, and a torn piece of fabric caught on a nearby bush. Thora's eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. The evidence was clear. Someone had been here, but they hadn't been alone. The ground bore marks of a person and something else, something larger, judging by the deep clawed indentations in the soil. Whatever had happened here, it had ended quickly and violently. Thora's hand instinctively moved to the hilt of Gramson, the sword's dark presence thrumming with anticipation as it sensed her growing tension. As she continued to search the area, she suddenly felt a sharp gust of wind brush past her face, followed by the faint whistle of an arrow. She barely had time to react as Ugla, startled by this close call, took to the sky with a flurry of wings. Thora's heart pounded as she instinctively dropped into a crouch and scanned the forest for the source of the attack. Across the clearing, she spotted the archer, an elf with gray-green skin that resembled the texture of dry leaves, blending seamlessly with the surrounding foliage. The elf stood tall and poised, longbow leveled directly at her, the bowstring taut and ready to release another arrow. As Thora and the elf locked eyes, Gramson roared in her mind, urging her to kill the creature before it could strike again. But Thora resisted the blade's influence, knowing a hasty move could end in disaster. She dived behind a nearby tree, taking cover as she assessed her options. Peeking around the edge, she saw the elf's stance hadn't wavered. The bowstring remained drawn. The elf's luminous eyes locked onto her position with unwavering focus. The elf's face was partially obscured by a wooden mask, intricate carvings with the image of an inverted tree, its roots and branches interwoven in a complex pattern. The eyes behind the mask were unnervingly large and unblinking, glowing faintly in the dim light. The elf spoke, their voice low and melodic, but the words were foreign to Thora's ears. An ancient language, the first tongue, spoken by few outside the oldest of elven kin. Though Thora couldn't understand the words, the intent was clear. The elf saw her as a threat.
I don't speak first tongue,
Thora called out cautiously, trying to keep her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. The elf's posture remained rigid, the bowstring still taut, as they replied in a heavily accented Ironlander.
There are too many interlopers in the motherwoods of late.
Gramson still hissed in her mind, its vitriolic suggestions tempting her to act rashly. but Thora managed to push the sword's influence aside once more. Slowly, deliberately, she stood up, keeping her hands visible and open to show she meant no harm.
I'm looking for my father. He's tall, broad-chested with a medium-length beard and braids. He carries a shield like mine.
The elf's eyes narrowed slightly, their gaze flickering to the shield on Thora's back.
Your people are not welcome here, Ironlander.
The elf replied coldly.
Take your life and leave these woods.
Thora took a cautious step forward, her hands still raised in a gesture of peace.
Please. My father was here not long ago, but I don't recognize these tracks. If I don't find him, my family will be exiled from our home.
The elf's eyes flickered with something close to pity, though their expression remained guarded. A long, tense moment passed before the elf spoke again.
If your father leaves, he is most likely taken by the Varu in this region.
Thora's mind raced as she tried to understand the elf's words. The Veru, or Varu, were only myths in Ghostwalk, but she soon realized that the legends of fierce, canine-like creatures of the deep wilds had been more than fables.
Veru? The Wolfman?
To be sacrificed and eaten. If he's very lucky, in that order.
But he hasn't been sacrificed yet?
I can't say.
The elf replied, their tone neutral.
Varu prefer their sacrifices alive. They relish in the fear and pain of their prey.
Thora slowly lowered her hands as the weight of the situation settled heavily on her shoulders.
I'm called Thora,
she said, introducing herself with a nod. As if on cue, a rumbling call echoed from above, signaling Ugla's return. The great owl swooped down from the dark canopy, her red-orange eyes the only visible feature in the gloom. She perched on a branch nearby, her gaze fixed on the elf, who watched her with a mixture of curiosity and respect.
That's Ugla,
Thora said, gesturing to the owl. The elf's stance softened slightly, and their bow lowered a fraction as they observed the bird.
Owls are revered by my people.
The elf murmured, their voice almost reverent.
Perfectly hidden, silent hunters who thrive in the mother woods.
Thora extended her arm, inviting Ugla to land. The owl hesitated for a moment before gliding down to her forearm, her wings spreading wide as she settled.
Would you like to meet her?
Thora offered, hoping to bridge the gap between them. The elf took a cautious step forward, their curiosity piqued. But Ugla let out an angry hoot, flaring her 7-foot wingspan, a display of warning that stopped the elf in their tracks. Thora gave a wry smile.
She'll be more friendly if you put the bow away. What's your name?
The elf hesitated, then slowly lowered the bow and slung it across their back.
I am called Sidura,
they replied, stepping closer, with their earlier hostility replaced with a wary curiosity. Thora and Sidura slowly began to let their respective guards down as they bonded over Ugla. The great owl, usually aloof and cautious, seemed to sense the change in the atmosphere, allowing Sidura to approach her without the usual display of dominance. Sidura's hand gently stroked Ugla's feathers, their gray-green skin contrasting against the bird's dark plumage. For a brief moment, the tension that had marked their initial encounter dissolved, replaced by a mutual respect and an unspoken understanding. As they continued to talk, Sidura revealed the true nature of their presence in the Mother Woods. They had been hunting a small pack of Veru, tracking them for days through the dense forest. The Veru, they explained, were in the midst of preparing for a rite of passage, a brutal ritual that would mark their transition into full adulthood within their savage society. The rite required them to capture a sacrifice and present it to the Wolf Mother, their revered deity, as a sign of their strength and loyalty. Sidura's voice grew tense as they shared their suspicion that this very pack might have taken Thora's father. The Veru, Sidura explained, favored strong and resilient captives, those who would provide the most satisfying struggle before their inevitable sacrifice. Thor's father, with his Ironlander heritage and warrior spirit, would be seen as an ideal offering. As Thora listened, the dark voice of Gramson echoed in her mind, weaving its way through her thoughts like a serpent. The sword urged her to make an iron vow to aid Sidura in this hunt, recognizing this alignment of their goals and the undeniable truth that there was strength in numbers. The ancient blade clearly saw the alliance as an opportunity to satiate its dark hunger, but Thora saw it as a means to rescue her father and bring him home. Without hesitation, Thora moved to where the first arrow had landed, the one Sidura had shot across the clearing in their earlier standoff. She reached down and grasped the arrow, feeling the cool metal of the arrowhead in her hand. With a deep breath, she raised the arrow and made her iron vow aloud, her voice firm and resolute.
I, Thora of the Veiled Mountains, swear upon this iron to aid Sidura in rescuing her kin from the Veru, and in doing so, find my father and bring him back from the darkness.
Sidura watched her with a mixture of respect and solemnity, understanding the weight of an iron vow among the Ironlanders. When Thora finished, they nodded in approval, acknowledging the bond that had now been forged between them. There was no longer a mere partnership of convenience. It was a sacred oath that neither could break without dire consequences. With their alliance sealed, Thora and Sidura wasted no time in setting off together to find their quarry. The dense forest, once a foreboding maze of twisted roots and towering trees, now became a path to their goal, navigated swiftly and efficiently under Sidura's guidance. The elf moved through the terrain with a grace that spoke of a lifetime spent in the Motherwoods, their every step precise and purposeful. Thora, though less familiar with the terrain, followed closely behind. Ugla soared above them, her sharp eyes scanning the ground for any sign of the Varu or their tracks. After hours of relentless tracking, as the sun dipped low in the sky and the forest grew even darker, they arrived at their destination. An ancient city, carved from stone, long reclaimed by the relentless march of nature. The city's once grand structures were now crumbling relics, their surfaces covered in thick layers of moss and creeping vines. The forest had taken back what was once its own, wrapping the stone buildings in a green shroud that spoke of centuries of abandonment. Broken archways, toppled columns, and fragmented statues littered the landscape, the remnants of a forgotten civilization that had once thrived here. But it was the heartwood that dominated the scene, unmarred and verdant. The tree was the largest Thora had ever seen, its massive trunk stretching skyward, branches reaching out like the arms of a giant, covered in thick, dark leaves. Its roots, gnarled and ancient, twisted through the city's stone foundations as if they themselves were the keepers of the secrets buried below. Beneath the heartwood lay the entrance to the city's catacomb, a yawning, dark passage that seemed to beckon them forward. It was a place of fear, silence, and shadows, where the air grew colder and the sense of foreboding deepened with every step closer. Thora and Sidura crouched in the underbrush, their eyes fixed on a small group of Varu that stood vigil at the entrance. These wolfmen had fur matted with dirt and blood, and they were lean and muscular. It was obvious their bodies were built for hunting and killing. Thora's grip tightened on Gramson as she assessed the situation. The Varu were formidable, no question, but not invincible. And with Sidura's knowledge and her own strength, they had a chance. Thora turned to Sidura, who met her gaze with a determined nod. The elf's bow was already in hand, an arrow nocked and ready. Ugla, perched on a nearby branch, watched silently, awaiting the signal to strike. The time for stealth was over. The hunt had begun, and the iron vow demanded nothing less than victory. Sidura pointed out the guards, their voice barely above a whisper.
We need to lure them away from the entrance. Picking them off one by one will be our best chance.
Thor nodded in agreement. They settled on a plan. Sidura would wound one of the guards, drawing others away, while Ugla would distract another. Thora would then confront the remaining guard. And with that, Sidura let the notched arrow loose, and they watched the arrow fly true, striking one of the guards in the leg. The Varu howled in pain, limping away as compatriots sought out the unseen archer. Simultaneously, Ugla swooped down and slashed at another guard's ear before flying off. Enraged, the bleeding guard chased after the owl. With the remaining guard focused on the entrance, Thora drew Graham's son and raised her shield. She charged forward, overpowering the lone Varu, and killed him, which the sword relished. With the guards dispatched, Thora and Sidura entered the catacombs. Thora noticed that the walls were lined with ancient carvings and remnants of the city's past. Investigating closer, she saw that the walls and carvings also glistened with shiny black sheen. They moved closer, following the sound of distant voices and a faint glowing light. Within the catacombs, they found Sidura's kin locked in a cage. Sidura rushed forward, their fingers deftly working the lock as they talked to their people. After a moment, Sidura said,
They say the Ironsworn took your father in to the sacrificial altar.
Thora's teeth were on edge as she pushed deeper into the catacombs. In an antechamber, she interrupted a Varu druid sharpening a sacrificial dagger. Down below, she could see her father bound to a stone altar. Even from that distance, she could see his condition was dire, but he was alive. Utilizing her distraction at the sight of her father, the druid got the upper hand and overpowered Thora. Ugla swooped down to save her, knocking the druid over the railing, but it managed to get a brutal stab on the owl as it fell. Thora rushed down to her father's side, her fingers working frantically to free him. Before she could finally free him, however, a low, deep growl echoed through the chamber. Thora turned to see the Wolf Mother, a colossal elder wolf standing 10 feet tall, emerging from the shadows. The creature's eyes glowed and its fangs glistened as it snarled. Thora gave Coldfin her hand axe to finish freeing himself from his bonds and lured the Wolf Mother away from the altar. With Graham's son in her hand and her shield ready, Thora faced down the Wolf Mother. Unsure how to assault something so large, Grahamson finally offered some useful guidance in combat based on her ancestors' interactions with similar beasts during the settling of the Ironlands. The Wolf Mother's sheer size and strength were overwhelming, but Thora fought with determination. Fatigue set in as the wolf battered Thora around. Before it could go in for the kill, however, a familiar hand axe flew into the beast's shoulder. The Wolf Mother turned its gaze over to the altar. Suddenly, an arrow hit the wolf in the neck. From the antechamber up above, Sidura leveled another arrow. Grahamson screamed in Thora's mind.
Now, kill.
With a powerful strike aimed at the Wolf Mother's exposed throat, Thora landed a deep, fatal blow. A crimson river flowed onto the stone floor as the great beast wheezed and collapsed, its body heaving one last breath before going still. Thora turned back to her father and finished freeing him from his bindings. She helped Coldfin to his feet, and with Sidura's assistance, they made their way out of the catacombs and back to the surface, the first lights of dawn breaking over the ancient city. Sidura's kin moved silently, their expressions a mix of fear and exhaustion. As they reached the ancient city's entrance, the first rays of sun broke over the horizon, bathing the ruins in a soft, golden glow. The elves created a ring and spoke to each other in first tongue. Thora and her father looked at Sidura, who spoke softly with their kin. After some discussion, Sidura turned from the circle. They stepped forward, their eyes peering out from under the mask to meet Thora's.
After some discussion, my kin had decided not to kill your father for trespassing, but you are both to leave the motherlands immediately. You will not be permitted to return.
Thora bowed her head in respect.
I will remember that, Sidura. Safe travels.
And I am also bound to thank you, Thora. Without your help, I might never have found my kin. The Varu would have sacrificed them, and your father would have shared their fate.
The elf handed Thora a familiar feather. Sidura's voice drifted as they stepped back into the wood.
Ugla was brave. She will be remembered in song.
With that, the elves melted back into the forest, their forms blending seamlessly with the trees and underbrush until they were gone. Thora turned to Coldfin, who had been watching the exchange quietly. Coldfin Koldottir, although battered, bloodied, and bruised, stood tall, his eyes filled with pride and relief. Thora punched him.
Why did you leave after the battle? You came here knowing what would happen to your family?
Coldfin wiped the blood from his mouth, his gaze drifting to the massive tree known as the Heartwood. I flew into a blood rage when your brother was killed, and my body paid the price. After the skirmish with the raiders, I was gravely wounded. As I lay on the battlefield, barely conscious, I had a vision. The Heartwood called to me, showing me the veins of black steel running beneath this ancient city. The vision was so vivid, so powerful, that I knew I had to find it. I was destined to find it, and I did. Her father reached into her pocket and then unfurled his hand, revealing an obsidian stone. I found this just before the Varu captured me. The city around Heartwood is built with it. It's stronger than any iron or steel that we know of. None of it has been found in the Veiled Mountains since Gramson was forged.
What if you had died? Why not tell the others in Ghostwalk first?
Coldfin shook his head. I was in no condition to explain, and the visions were so urgent. I feared that if I didn't follow it immediately, the knowledge would fade like a dream and be lost. I know I left without thinking of the consequences, but we're minors. This could change all of our lives.
I gather the vision didn't warn you about the Varu.
And the journey here was more arduous than I had anticipated. I was barely standing when I was captured. I'm so sorry, Thora. We'll explain everything to the council. The black steel could change our future, but we need to ensure our present is secure first. Thora placed a hand on her father's shoulder.
As misguided and selfish as it was, you did what you thought was right. And now so will I.
She snatched the shard of black steel from her father and threw it into the forest. Her father protested. Gramson, too.
You heard Sidura. If we bring all of Ghostwalk here, it will be war. The extermination of all of us. Some things need to be forgotten.
After a moment, Coldfin remitted with a nod, his eyes filled with pride. Where did you find such wisdom?
Black steel is not the only thing to be found in these woods.
The Kolddotters embraced, picked up their shields and weapons, and started the long and dangerous trek back to Ghostwalk. Ironsworn is a fantastic system that allows for so much creativity in the process of coming up with your story. It sets up a fantastic dark fantasy world for you to explore, and it also has a very powerful oracle system that allow you to answer any questions that come up over the course of play. The Iron Vow system is also great for establishing that your characters have goals that they need to accomplish, and there will be complications along the way to achieving it. There are a number of resources that your character can start with and accumulate as they go through. In my playthrough, I drew 3 resources to start with. 1, that my character used a shield in combat. 2, that they had a sentient sword with them. And 3, that they had an owl companion. And the owl companion does actually help you in combat. And it doesn't have to be an owl. There's a variety of different animals, including wyverns, that may accompany and help you during the course of your adventure. And as we saw that happen with Ugla, sometimes they have to pay the ultimate price. One of the best things that I can say about Ironsworn and the Ironsworn system is that instead of being just a one-off or a short adventure or something like that, the Oracle system and the actual mechanics of it set you up for a solo campaign, which is something that I haven't really encountered before. Most of the time when I think of campaigns, I'm thinking of something like Pathfinder or D&D, or maybe in Monster of the Week if you have a very good keeper. But Ironsworn, I felt like I could just keep going and going. And I actually had to stop myself from continuing the story because I didn't want this episode to be 4 or 5 episodes. It is available for free. And of course, I'll get to it in a minute, but I definitely suggest that you check it out. It's also, the system is available as a backbone for other genres of campaign that you can do. It doesn't have to be dark fantasy. You can take the bare bones of the system and make it a pirate game. Or there is, I know, an official canon expansion called, I think it's Starforged. And so it's Ironsworn in space, essentially. It's very cool. I will be checking that out at some point, but yeah, check it out. It's totally worth it. A very special thank you to my friend Meggan Amos for being the voice of Thora Kolddotir. This season, I'm hoping to have more people actually step in and give some vibrancy to the characters in the stories, and Meggan did a great job with it. If you're interested in more with Meggan, she just recently finished the first season of her Ghost show over on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. The handles for that show, of course, are Ghost Show Podcast on Instagram and TikTok. Meggan also has a science communication page that's pretty cool over on TikTok, Instagram, and Substack at Megaverse. Go check it out if you need some more science in your life. I think we all do these days. I'm going to be putting a link in the show notes to Meggan's projects as well. Feel free to swing by and share the love. As always, I'm going to put a link in the show notes to Ironsworn so that you can go check it out for yourself. Like I said, it's a free game that has some incredible mechanics and Oracle systems. And let me know how your adventures through the Ironlands go. But just remember, your story will be different.